America in the 1920s was roaring for some, but not everyone was invited to the party. For African Americans, this was an era of deep segregation, violent racism, and systemic exclusion. Yet, even within that hostile climate, something remarkable happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A neighborhood called Greenwood, built entirely by black hands, rose to prosperity. Doctors, entrepreneurs, teachers, and artists building wealth and community in a world designed to keep them out. This place was so successful, so thriving, it earned a powerful nickname, Black Wall Street. But on the night of May 31st, 1921, a mob of white residents, some deputized by the city, marched into Greenwood. By the time the sun rose the next day, over 1,200 homes and businesses were reduced to rubble. Dozens, possibly hundreds of people were dead. This wasn't just a riot. This was an attack, a massacre, and for decades, it was hidden from America's collective memory. To understand the Tulsa Race Massacre, we need to understand what made Greenwood so extraordinary and why its very success made it a target. In the early 1900s, Oklahoma had just become a state. Tulsa was booming from the oil rush. Many black Americans moved there during this time, some as former slaves from Indian Territory, others as migrants fleeing the racial violence of the South. Segregation laws, known as Jim Crow, kept black citizens separate from white areas. But out of that forced exclusion, black Tulsans built something incredible. Greenwood became a self-contained, self-sufficient black economic hub. It had its own banks, schools, restaurants, movie theaters, newspapers, churches, and even an aviation school. One street, Greenwood Avenue, was lined with over 200 black-owned businesses. There were doctors with their own practices, lawyers, and real estate developers. The community had wealth, but more than that, it had unity. Some residents were extremely well off. One man, O.D.U. Gurley, a wealthy black landowner, was instrumental in developing the neighborhood. He bought 40 acres and sold only to other African Americans. In an era when black Americans were often barred from owning property, voting, or accessing public services, Greenwood stood as a defiant model of what was possible. But not everyone saw its success as inspiring. Many white Tulsans resented Greenwood. They saw it as a threat, economically, socially, and symbolically. The myth of black inferiority couldn't survive if black prosperity was staring them in the face. Racial tension in Tulsa simmered under the surface, and it didn't take much to ignite it. On the morning of May 30th, 1921, 19-year-old Dick Rowland, a black shoe shiner, entered the Drexel building downtown. He took an elevator to use the segregated restroom located on an upper floor. The elevator operator was Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white girl. No one knows exactly what happened inside that elevator. Some accounts say Rowland may have tripped and grabbed Page's arm to steady himself. She may have screamed, startled. There was no evidence of assault, no injuries reported, but the facts didn't matter. Later that day, Rowland was arrested. The next morning, the Tulsa Tribune published a front-page story titled, "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in Elevator." The article included inflammatory language, and according to some reports, may have included a now-missing editorial calling for a lynching. As word spread, white residents began gathering outside the courthouse where Rowland was being held. Lynch mobs were not uncommon at the time. Oklahoma had already seen dozens in the previous years, but this time, the black community decided to act. Groups of black men, veterans, came to the courthouse to defend Rowland. Many were armed. They had seen too many innocent black men murdered without trial. Tensions escalated when a white man tried to disarm a black veteran and a gunshot rang out. Chaos followed. Within minutes, both sides were exchanging fire. The outnumbered black group retreated to Greenwood, but the violence was just beginning. As dusk fell over Tulsa on May 31st, 1921, a sense of unease blanketed the city. Following the gunfire at the courthouse, rumors spread like wildfire. Black men are arming themselves, some whispered. A white man has been shot, others said. Whether true or not, fear had taken root, and fear quickly gave way to rage. By 9 p.m., white mobs had begun to organize in force. Men poured into downtown Tulsa, some on foot, others in vehicles. Many were armed with pistols, rifles, and even shotguns. But what made this different from a typical lynch mob was who was helping them: the local authorities. Police officers and city officials, instead of calming the tension, actively armed white civilians. Deputized on the spot, many of these men were given badges and weapons and told to go do their duty. That duty quickly turned into an open call to invade Greenwood. Just after midnight, all hell broke loose. The first fires were set on the outskirts of the district. Small homes and businesses were targeted, windows smashed, doors kicked in, residents dragged into the street. Armed white mobs moved block by block. Those who tried to flee were shot. Those who stayed were often beaten, arrested, or worse. Some black residents fought back. Many were veterans of World War I, men who had seen combat in Europe and returned to a country that still treated them as second-class citizens. They fired from rooftops, used what limited ammunition they had, and did their best to protect their families. But they were outnumbered, and the attackers were increasingly organized. One of the most shocking elements of the massacre was the aerial assault. At least a dozen small planes, likely privately owned by white residents, flew over Greenwood in the early morning hours of June 1st. Eyewitnesses later described what they saw. Some planes dropped kerosene bombs or incendiary devices onto buildings. Others shot at fleeing residents from above. This wasn't chaos. It was military-style devastation from the air in an American city against American citizens. By 5 a.m., Greenwood was burning. Columns of smoke rose into the air. Families tried to escape with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Children cried out for parents lost in the confusion. Gunfire echoed across streets now lit only by flames. A black hospital caring for wounded residents was targeted and destroyed. Churches, normally spared even in war, were set ablaze. Schools were razed. The attack was indiscriminate. Elderly residents were shot in their homes. Pregnant women fled barefoot. Looters followed behind the destruction, stealing whatever was left: jewelry, furniture, cash registers. Some white rioters even posed for photos next to the wreckage, grinning. By mid-morning, Greenwood was unrecognizable. Once a beacon of black independence and prosperity, it was now a scorched, hollowed shell. Entire families were either dead, missing, or being held in makeshift internment centers, rounded up by the National Guard or armed white citizens, and marched at gunpoint to the fairgrounds, the armory, or even livestock pens. The official narrative claimed the National Guard restored order, but they arrived far too late, after the destruction was nearly complete, and many survivors recalled that some guards joined the white mobs or stood idly by. The massacre lasted roughly 16 hours, but its impact would stretch for generations. Greenwood, the symbol of what black excellence could be in America, was wiped out overnight, not by nature, not by war, but by its own city. By the morning of June 1st, 1921, Greenwood lay in ruins. What had once been one of the most successful black communities in America had been violently erased in less than 24 hours. Officially, the state recorded 36 deaths, 25 black, 11 white. But eyewitness accounts, survivor testimonies, and more recent investigations suggest that number was a gross understatement. Some estimates go as high as 300 lives lost. Bodies were buried hastily, some in unmarked graves. Others, survivors claimed, were thrown into the Arkansas River or burned beyond recognition. For decades, mass graves remained a rumor, a painful truth that the city and state refused to verify or even acknowledge. Meanwhile, over 1,200 homes had been destroyed. Dozens of businesses, black-owned and built over years, sometimes decades, were completely wiped out. Churches, hospitals, and schools were left in ashes. The devastation was total. It wasn't just an attack on property. It was an attempt to destroy a people's sense of security, power, and hope. And for the survivors, there was no help. Many were forced into internment camps, held at gunpoint in facilities like the fairgrounds, denied food, water, or even the freedom to leave. The city forced black residents to carry green cards if they wanted to move around afterward, essentially tagging them like criminals, while white rioters went unpunished. Property losses were estimated at over $1.5 million in 1921 dollars, which is over $30 million today. And yet, insurance companies refused to pay a single claim. Most policies had riot exclusions, and they used them mercilessly. It wasn't just homes and buildings that were lost, it was generational wealth. Families who had built legacies from the ground up were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and no one, not the city, not the state, not the federal government, offered any real compensation. No charges were filed. No one was held accountable. The system did what it was designed to do: protect white power, suppress black progress, and erase the truth. And yet, in the face of absolute destruction, Greenwood did something extraordinary. It began to rebuild. Despite their homes being reduced to rubble, despite being denied insurance money or public aid, black Tulsans began pitching tents on the charred remains of their land. These makeshift shelters quickly turned into communities again, because they had no choice. There were no reparations, no rebuilding funds, no citywide recovery plan for them. Churches were among the first buildings reconstructed. They became community centers, feeding the hungry, organizing relief, and offering spiritual and psychological support. Within months, new businesses started to open, families shared labor, food, and money to support one another. Carpenters helped neighbors reconstruct homes. Teachers reopened makeshift classrooms in basements or tents so children wouldn't fall behind. Some survivors even took legal action, fighting in court for decades to have their losses recognized. Their cases were largely dismissed, but still, they tried. And then, the city struck again. Not with fire this time, but with policy. City officials proposed a plan to rezone the Greenwood district for industrial use, effectively banning residents from rebuilding on their own land. It was a blatant attempt to erase the community once and for all. But black Tulsans resisted. They organized, they fought, they rebuilt anyway, defying zoning threats and city pressure. By the late 1920s, Greenwood was functioning again. It would never fully recover to its former wealth or scale, but it had reclaimed space. It had endured. But the trauma was deep, and the silence was deeper. Most white residents refused to acknowledge what had happened. Black survivors were often told to forget it and move on. Schools didn't teach it. Textbooks didn't mention it. A generation of children grew up in Tulsa, unaware that their city had once hosted one of the worst acts of racial violence in U.S. history, right in their own backyard. What Greenwood did after the massacre wasn't just rebuilding, it was resistance. It was survival. It was a declaration that even when history tries to bury you, you keep building. When the smoke cleared over Greenwood, something equally disturbing began: the erasure. Local authorities, city officials, and newspapers quickly moved to control the narrative. They called it a race riot. Placing blame on the black community, they claimed the violence was a reaction to black aggression. Even the term massacre was avoided for decades. Survivors were silenced by fear, by trauma, and by threats. Talking about the massacre could cost you your job. It could get you arrested. For some, it could get you killed. The city didn't just ignore the victims. It actively buried the truth. Police reports were missing. The Tulsa Tribune's original article, possibly the one that incited the lynch mob, was torn from archives. No public memorials were erected. No school children were taught what happened in their own city. And the rest of the country? It barely noticed. The massacre was absent from textbooks, history lectures, and news media for nearly a century. It wasn't just a physical attack, it was historical erasure. It took over 75 years before the massacre started to re-enter the public conversation. In the 1990s, survivors, many of them over 80 years old, began to speak out. People like Viola Fletcher, who was 107 when she testified before Congress in 2021, remembered fleeing in terror as a child while her neighborhood was burned to the ground. Their stories sparked interest, and historians began digging. In 1996, Oklahoma created the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, later renamed the Tulsa Race Massacre Commission, to investigate. It was during this time that mass graves were seriously investigated. Oral histories had long spoken of bodies being dumped in secret locations, and ground-penetrating radar in the 2010 confirmed what many survivors already knew. Mass burial sites exist in Tulsa. The commission documented the scale of destruction, eyewitness accounts, and the complicity of officials. Yet, even after all this, the city and state still have not paid reparations. In 2020 and 2021, on the 99th and 100th anniversaries, national attention returned. Documentaries aired, articles spread. For the first time, America was ready, or at least willing, to look at Tulsa honestly. Yet Tulsa's legacy persists. Descendants of survivors continue to fight for recognition and reparations, while artists, writers, and filmmakers work to bring Greenwood's story into the national consciousness. Legislation aimed at providing financial justice has been proposed, though not yet passed. Survivors have filed lawsuits, and though some buildings have been restored, such as through the opening of the Greenwood Rising History Center in 2021, many argue that these efforts fall short without real economic compensation. The people of Greenwood lost not only their homes and businesses, but also their families, futures, and dignity. Their descendants still grapple with the economic gap left behind. While commemoration cannot restore what was stolen, telling the truth is a necessary beginning. This massacre is no longer forgotten, but it remains unresolved. The Tulsa Race Massacre isn't ancient history. It's American history. It's personal history for thousands of descendants still alive today. We honor the victims by saying their names, telling their stories, and refusing to let this be buried again. Because remembering is only the first step, justice still waits. If you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the story. If you're interested in more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a great story. This is Liam. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.